Are you actually bad at making decisions, or are you just trying to make the perfect ones? If you're the kind of person who cares deeply, thinks through every possible outcome, and can see the ripple effects before you even move, stay with me, okay? Because I'm going to show you exactly where you're getting stuck and how to shrink the decision so you can finally move without spiraling, second guessing, or needing a guarantee. Because you can see the ripple effects of every decision, that's what makes it feel high stakes. The decision isn't hard. The pressure you've put on it is. And as we're entering the new year, coming up with decisions for our business, trying to make decisions around our offers, our model, our pricing, I often notice clients get really stuck in this analysis paralysis. They get stuck with trying to make the perfect decision. And I think this is that invisible weight behind the stuck. Most people don't stay stuck because they don't know what to do. It's not that they don't know what they want. They stay stuck because they've made the decision mean so much that doing anything feels like a risk. Especially if you're at a point in business, you feel as if, or the reality is, you have more to lose. Maybe you've made more money, you have a team that relies on you, you have family that relies on your financial income for your household support. So decisions just feel so much bigger than they used to when you were in the earlier days and you had kind of the naivety and the luxury of just kind of figuring it out without all that extra pressure and weight on you. You know, I think a lot of the time that we can be scared of wasting time, wasting money, messing up the brand, diminishing our reputation, choosing the wrong niche, alienating the wrong audience, hiring the wrong team member, launching the wrong thing at the wrong time, like the list goes on. And when you're holding all of that, it feels easier to stay still, to not decide. But staying still doesn't actually bring relief. It just delays the clarity and really puts you in a position of paused momentum. And I think sometimes we will unconsciously do that. You know, we will be sitting in something where we've been waiting on making a decision. We will join the $30,000 mastermind. We will hire all these quote unquote consultants and experts who are supposed to know more than we know. We will buy 1 million courses searching for somebody else to give us the answer and thinking that that external validation is going to be the thing that creates the internal peace, that creates the internal calmness for us to finally decide whatever it is that we want to do. And yes, I don't want to diminish the value of having outside perspective, but when you outsource your agency around decisions that you are the one that's responsible to hold after the decision has been made, I think that can be a really, dangerous territory to put yourself in. And it's usually a pattern that I've seen with clients. It's a pattern that I've even gone through myself over the years in business because I am so afraid of making the wrong decision that I am clearly I need to trust somebody else's choice here. Just tell me what to do and I'll execute. And oftentimes when I have done that, it has forced me to, one, make an expensive quote unquote lesson, but it has taught me how to return home to myself and also how to utilize that type of external support in a better way. So instead of me outsourcing my agency to somebody else to make the decision for me, I do a better job of hiring individuals who help me hear myself more clearly, that help me think through the decision making, that help me understand the consequences and the trade-offs and to reduce the pressure and the noise around the decision making. And that's what I really want to walk you through, how I've coached clients through this on the layers of decision making and why you might be, because this happens over and over again in business. I don't care how successful you are or how far you've come or how many decisions you've made. Anytime you are pressed up with something new, you run into this situation again. So having a decision-making framework can be something that you can utilize over and over again. But once your business is profitable, visible, and relied on by others, stop feeling theoretical. At this level, indecision isn't about not knowing what to do. Again, the analysis paralysis or constantly second guessing every business move is how it kind of shows up, but it's about being able to name exactly what's at stake, not because you're unclear, but because the margin for error feels smaller even when it isn't. And it's really important to actually name that, to be be able to identify that and be able to articulate that for yourself. Because whenever I'm, on a coaching call with a client and they're like, I'm trying to make this decision, and they're going through all the possible scenarios, they've thought through all the possible outcomes. Usually it's always like the worst case scenarios in a lot of situations because they are in heavy risk management mode. Think about how much airtime you're giving to risk management, which is, yes, it's very, very important. But how much airtime are you also giving to possibility and hope and opportunity management, like the positive side of things? And we'll talk about that a little bit more, but I want to walk through this 3-step decision-making framework because this is where clients typically get stuck. And it's really important to be able to name where you are. This is also the reason why you can't make decisions because you're probably functioning in one of these areas at the wrong time. So I would definitely grab a notebook, write this down, pause this so you can draft some coaching notes for yourself so that you can use this as a self-coaching tool in the future. This mirrors how decisions actually mature over time, but most people stall by treating all 3 phases as if they carry the same level of risk. So the first phase is could do. This is where every option lives. It's hypothetical. It's risk-free. It's endlessly expansive. You know this place. It sounds like I could pivot my offer. I could raise my rates. I could launch a group program. I could go full-time and leave my corporate job. I could post more or differently or somewhere else. There are no consequences here, but also there is no movement here. There is no clarity. There is no action. There is no new data. It's just a perfect mental loop of overthinking is what exists here. This is where a lot of people hide and where a lot of us stay stuck. It feels like work because you're thinking so deep, but it's all happening in your head. You're planning and preparing and posturing, but you're not actually choosing. So in this could do phase, this is also where I see a lot of people overspend. And this is where I have made mistakes of overspending, over hiring, over outsourcing and resourcing, because you will keep yourself busy for weeks or months, or like the could do, I feel like is a place where most of us live in procrastination. And where I've done this over and over again is I'm going to just call myself out is with like software. I will be like, well, should I stay with Asana? Should I go to ClickUp? Should I get Notion? Then I'll go down a rabbit hole, watch 3 hours of videos on how to set up a Notion dashboard, create a Notion account, try to set it all up. 6 hours have passed. Did anything get accomplished? Not at all. I'm over here chasing a decision is totally irrelevant for the problem that I'm trying to solve right now. But I stay in the could do, which I see so many people do when they have reached a plateau in business where they're making good money, but they're in a kind of comfortable place and they say they want to grow. They say they want to be on that plateau, but things are pretty comfortable right now. So they live in the land of could do and they think about it a lot. They work on it a lot. They sit and ruminate, but they never actually decide. And I think this also happens a lot early stage in business where you have been thinking about doing something for years and you are just still living in the could do. My highly educated folks who are listening to this do this with getting more degrees and more credentials. And it's like, do you really need a PhD? Do you really need to go get the MBA? Do you really need another certification when you already have 4 or 5, but you have avoided the one thing that will actually bring you in money? You have not allowed yourself to be visible. You have done 0 marketing and you have made 0 sales activities. But guess what? You're in the land of could do. I could get this other certification to make me more credible, to make me more qualified, but you're not actually choosing the thing that is going to give you momentum. So that's the first phase that you could be stuck in, is the could do phase. The second phase is the choose to do. And this is where things start to shift. But here's what's important. You're choosing before you have certainty. And that's why this part feels hard. You can still be really scared and really afraid. You still don't know if it's right, but you move anyway. And this is where agency begins, not because you have proof that it will work, but because you're willing to find out. Choosing is not about being confident. And I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions. People will ask, well, how are you so confident in your decision making? Or how are you so motivated? Or how do you know? Baby, I don't. You don't. We don't. And, let's not, we can get biblical here for a second. And it's about being committed enough to gather the information. The difference between people who move and people who stay stuck in that could do phase, the ones who move let go of needing to be right before they act. And I think this is very, very difficult because many of us have been conditioned that we need to be perfect on the first try. Many of us have lived experiences where we have not been able to afford, like literally, maybe physically, maybe from a safety, an actual physical safety perspective, we have not been able to afford to make the wrong decision on the first time. So we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to get it right immediately. And if we don't, the meaning that we attach to that can feel so suffocating and feel so heavy. But it's really important, again, to be able to name what's going on and separate that, because in business, many of us want this life of entrepreneurship, honey. We are living in a land of risk. We are living in a land of faith. It's full execution of, we have to choose. We have to make the choice without knowing the outcome. And none of us know. I think that's the thing. Sometimes we will look at other people or look at people who quote unquote look more successful than us, and we think they figured out something, they have some secret. The only secret is they're willing to choose. And they're willing to pivot if things don't go the way that they had anticipated. And that's what moves us into step 3 is decide to do. This happens after the experience. You've chosen, you've moved, you now have data. You've seen what works, what doesn't, how it feels, what it creates. Now you can refine, adjust, exit, double down, or do whatever. We talk about decisions like final, like they're permanent. But the truth is, most of your decisions are iterative. The best decisions aren't made once. They're made over and over again with better information. But you can't decide until you choose. And you can't choose if you're stuck. So why do you stay in the could do zone? Because you've been conditioned to believe that good decisions come from certainty. That is a truth that many of us need to rewrite. As adults, especially in entrepreneurship, the best decisions come from movement. You won't think your way into the perfect path. You'll walk your way into that clarity that you need. That means sometimes you'll choose wrong. And that's just the reality of life. Like, many of us have made the wrong choice so many times in our life. That's just the human experience. There's nothing wrong with it. The meaning that you attach that about yourself, about your identity, about your character is really important to name here. And it absolutely doesn't mean that you have failed. It means you now have information. You can use that information to refine, to change course with clarity instead of this fear, this overwhelming pressure. But what if you choose wrong? It is something that clients will say to me over and over again. And I hear this all the time, regardless of what stage of business somebody is in, if they've just cracked their first $100,000 or if they're making multiple millions a year. What if I choose wrong? Let me offer a reframe that has changed how I coach clients, has also changed how I coach myself. You don't ruin your life by choosing wrong. You stall it by refusing to choose in the first place. Staying stuck because you're scared of the wrong choice keeps you in a safe but stagnant loop. And it's really not even safety. Movement, even messy movement, gives you momentum. It gives you perspective. It gives you power back. You're not frozen because you're incapable. You're frozen because you've made the decision mean more than it has to. And this is really an important thing, is when you notice yourself feeling this intense internal pressure around a decision, I invite you to pause and to ask yourself, what meaning am I attaching to this? And being able to name that, to write that down. What is the decision that you actually need to make? What are the choices that are available? And what meaning are you attaching to whatever thought that you have about what the outcome might be, or around the pressure that you are putting on yourself about, what you feel like you should know in advance? Because the choice has to come before the decision. But it's really helpful to also name what's going on for you internally and the meaning that you are attaching to the situation, so that you can start to, diffuse that to help you actually make a choice. And once you've made the choice, once you've had the experience, that's when you get to decide. You get to decide whether or not you want to keep doing it. You get to decide whether or not you want to change it up. But you are not able to make the decision until you first made the choice. And you can't make the decision until you've had the experience. So what if the decision was smaller? This is another reframe that I coach clients through all the time. So let's take this like a step deeper. Sometimes the reason a decision feels overwhelming is because you're zoomed out too far. You're trying to answer, what should my business model be for the next 5 years? We don't have a magic 8 ball, like what should my entire content strategy look like over the next 6 months? How do I scale sustainably and protect my capacity and hire the right team? And like, these are like big questions, important questions. And of course they can feel paralyzing because there's so many variables at play. Like, it's not that you're not looking at this from a strategic standpoint. You're actually being a good steward because you're asking yourself these questions and you are approaching this with a level of curiosity, and you want to be a good steward. You want to be a good CEO. You want to get it right. But this is a question that I like to pose, because what would this decision look like to help my clients get out of the could do zone and get them into a choose to do arena, so they can actually make a choice, so they can get some experience. And then once they get that experience, they can start making the decisions that will help frame the narrative of whatever the answer is to that question. Is try to break it down into smaller choices. So instead of looking at what does my business model need to be over the next 5 years, I might ask, what could this choice look like if it was just about the next $50,000? Or if they were trying to think through their entire business model and offer structure, what should the succession offer be when they haven't even figured out their signature offer? What if you weren't trying to design the entire business? What if we just figured out how to get you to a point where you are making predictable cash flow from one signature offer, and really try to downscale the choices and downscale the scope of the range in which they're trying to ask themselves the question. And when that choice feels too heavy, make the arena, make the question smaller, shrink the decision, shrink the timeline, shrink the stakes until you find a version that feels doable instead of paralyzing. This also, I think, is really true in setting revenue goals. I think that many of us, even for me, probably for the first 9 years of my business, 8 years of my business, I never hit my revenue goals. I set the biggest, loftiest revenue goals all of the time. And I don't know what I was doing to myself. I should have also been setting some under goals, like some baseline goals, some this gives me proof of progress goals, versus always just aiming way, way, way bigger. I think there is something to be said about setting goals that are very ambitious and feel wildly out of reach, because there is an energetic charge that provides for you. But I think there's also something to be said about, especially if you're stuck in paralysis, that you feel very stuck with making any choice at all. The pressure and the risk feels way too heavy, and there's just a lot of shame or negative emotion attached to it. It's really important to set what is a goal that lets me know that there is progress being made, that information is being gathered, that I'm getting effective data, and I'm going to set I'm going to choose a goal here that allows me to believe in the reality that I'm going to get the information that I need to then make a decision. That can be a baseline goal. Is what is the choice goal that lets me know I'm progressing in the right direction, that will give me good information so that I feel comfortable making a decision thereafter. And that can be also, I think that's just as important to set that type of goal, especially if you are somebody, or if it's a situation or a choice that you're trying to make around something that feels very high pressure. And again, I just think it's really important to shrink these things down. And some other real life examples is what should my business model be to replace my $100,000 salary? Let's reframe that. How can I make my next $1,000 doing something I know how to deliver? And you do notice, and I hope you are hearing this, is that when you reframe the question, it reframes your brain. Because now it makes something feel like the pressure reduces. Instead of saying how do I get rid of my job, replace my salary, get new health benefits, all of that is girl, that's a lot to try to digest at one time, especially if you don't even have a business yet, if you haven't even made money from the business yet. From there, we can just instead ask the question, how does this land? How can I make the next $1,000 doing something I know how to deliver already, that people already know me for? That's a skill set I already have. I don't need to get any extra certification or anything around it. Just if I had to make $1,000, what would I do? It reframes the entire dynamic. If you're spiraling on what platform should I focus on to grow my audience this year? Okay, there's a million possibilities. Let's reframe it. What would happen if I posted one reel and one YouTube video every day for the next 30 days, just as an experiment? It reframes it. And I think sometimes we need to be really honest with ourselves, because I've also noticed this too when I'm coaching clients, when I reframe them on shrinking down the pressure and reducing the risk around the question that they are trying to ask themselves. They'll be like, that's too small. And it's just like, well, where is that coming from? I know many of us are very high achieving. If you listen to this podcast or if you're watching this on YouTube, we can be very high achieving. And I think sometimes we have conditioned ourselves to only know how to function in very high risk, high stake environments. So sometimes we will manufacture the high risk, the high stake to just function under the pressure, because that is where our nervous system is most safe, even though that is where our nervous system is most dysregulated. Entrepreneurship is one of the best forms of therapy and personal development and personal healing, because if you are somebody who is a very dysregulated but highly successful individual, you will reconstruct high pressure, high stakes, high risk environments, because that is where your comfort zone is, even though it is wildly damaging to your nervous system in the long term. I'm naming this because I think it's really important for you to be able to self-reflect and be like, well, is that what I'm doing? Because now we can say, oh, this is just a pattern of my dysregulated nervous system. This is just a pattern of my hyper-independence. This is just a pattern of old behavior. It has absolutely nothing to do with the choice in front of me, And I think when we can separate that, it really diffuses the situation and allows us to take action and move forward. Another thing that I see happen all the time with clients is I need to redesign my org chart because my right hand just quit. And yes, high emotional stakes environment. There's probably a lot of moving pieces if one of your key team members leaves. But a way that I like to reframe it is, what if I hired an hourly assistant for 5 hours this week to take the small stuff off my plate so I can think again? It is doable. It reduces the risk. You don't have to make the perfect hire. You don't need the whole plan. You just need the next move. One final thing I really want to leave you with is that you are an adult. You have agency. You are not out of options. You are allowed to choose. You are allowed to learn. You are allowed to change your mind and re-choose again over and over again. The only real risk is pretending that you need certainty before you're allowed to make a choice. The only real risk is tricking yourself into believing that you need to know the perfect outcome before you make a decision, that you're supposed to anticipate the experience before you've even allowed yourself to have it. The most successful entrepreneurs are not the ones who always get it right. They're the ones who keep choosing. They don't freeze when it gets hard. They don't stall when it's unclear. They move, they choose, they experience, they decide, they refine, and they continue that over and over again. That is leadership. And when something doesn't work, they don't make it mean something about their worth. They make it mean something about the day. And that is really the level of CEO maturity that, I aim to continue to aspire and develop. That's real leadership. As a business owner, regardless if you're managing your team or not, when you're running a small business, it's about how are you leading yourself and your ability to be able to lead yourself in that way. And that's available to you right now. No certification, no external validation, no permission or perfect plan required. Just a choice. Get the experience. Once you have the experience, give yourself permission to decide. And when you're in that decision phase, you get to choose to do what you've been doing, to do something different, to change your mind, to re-choose again. And I really hope this was something that you can revisit. I encourage you to share this with a friend. Use this as a self-coaching tool. And I appreciate you so much for being here. And I will see you in the next episode.